Dr. Netsky, how did you become a composer and what got you into music?
I come from a family of musicians, starting as far back as my great-grandfather. I'm fourth generation musicians, and my uncle Harold Carr was a Broadway composer, and so as far as I knew, composing was just something that we were supposed to do. And my brothers are also songwriters. A bunch of my nephews and grandnephews, they also do. I don't have, wait, what am I saying? My grandnephews are like, 3 months old. But a bunch of my nephews are also musicians and also write songs and also have indie rock bands, and that's the way it is in my family.
Is there something or someone that got you interested in composing?
I think what got me interested in composing was that my Uncle Harold was a composer, and I heard tunes in my head when I was little, and if you're a composer, it kind of, the tunes tell you that you're a composer. Pretty much what happens. So if new tunes start showing up in your head that you can't identify, you're probably a composer.
How old were you when you started composing?
Well, the first piece that I got performed, it's interesting. I think the first time I really was active as a composer was in high school. And I started a band. I think I was probably in 10th grade, and we played a lot of music that I wrote. But as soon as I started getting my friends together to play, I started writing music for them.
What kind of composer would you call yourself?
I would call myself a composer. And I mean, I actually have 2 degrees in composition from New England Conservatory, which are from their so-called classical composition department. But where I actually teach, when I went to that classical composition department, I'd already been writing music for all kinds of groups. I'd already written for jazz band, for marching band, a little bit for orchestra, for string quartet. So, but also for folk groups and also songs. And I write songs with lyrics too. And I've written, 4 musicals also. So I write a lot of different kinds of music. So I wouldn't call myself any particular kind of composer. I do want to say that once I started writing what they call klezmer music, which is really Jewish party music, people started really noticing that I could write that. And that's really a style of music, as I say, goes back in my family a long way. And it also was a style of music that nobody did anything with for about 50 or 60 years. So when I started doing that, people, we like that. So my first thing that really got me into that was I wrote a commission. I wrote a piece I wrote this, you heard some of it, The Fool and the Flying Ship with Robin Williams. Maybe Mr. Fox played that, I don't know. But it's something from Rabbit Ears, and it was a very, very popular video in the early 1990s. And once I did that, people were calling me up saying, hey, can you write some of that klezmer music for us? So I write it, because that's one of the kinds of music I have in my head. But seriously, there's no limitations. Your music is who you are. And so, I mean, for me, there's all kinds of music that I can write at various times. It just depends on what you know and what you hear.
How did you come up with your ideas for your compositions, Dr. Netsky?
Composers get all kinds of ideas. For me, it's really the same as it was when I was little. And it's just that a tune will pop into my head. And I'll tell you something, honestly, this tune popped into my head. And it was one morning, and I already knew about this commission. It was probably in October or November. And I was thinking, what am I going to write? How am I going to write? And I knew kind of what I wanted to write. But this tune popped into my head. And it was actually like this. Yum, ba-dum, bum. It was like tango. Ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I said, why am I thinking about a tango? And then I took the tune and I said, you know what? That would be a good tune for this commission. So I changed it into a Jewish dance, and it became this tune. And that's the way it works. And for me, if you ask my wife, you'll know that any piece of paper in the house is fair game, right? So if there's a napkin sitting on the table, there's an envelope sitting near the bed or something, I might, 2 o'clock in the morning, I might get an idea for a tune. You put some lines on the envelope, you write down the tune, and the next morning you remember it, and then you might turn it into a piece for an orchestra, you might turn it into a piece for a concert band, I might turn it into a piece for my klezmer band, or I might just bring it to New England Conservatory where I teach and just give it to my students to improvise on. But it all depends on what the tune is. But inspiration comes from all kinds of places. Sometimes you don't know where it comes from. Sometimes it comes from a person you know. You know, somebody who you really like, and you're thinking about them, and suddenly a tune comes to you. You have no idea what's going to happen in terms of inspiration if you are a creative musician. So if it happens and you're a creative musician, you know, learn how to write down the tune. That's a good idea, because, you know, getting your computer on and hooking up GarageBand and all that, that takes a while. But take a piece of paper, write some lines on it, that's fast.
Dr. Netsky, tell us about your inspiration for Nonantum Bulgar.
So Nonantum Bulgar is really trying to picture the scene 100 years ago. You know, here in the lake, you know, they have a parade. I think a lot of you know about the Saints Festival, right? How many people heard about the Saints Festival that the Carmen Society has every year? So they have this great carnival. They have a parade down Adams Street. They have a parade through the neighborhood. Well, 100 years ago, when they built the first synagogue in Newton, also on Adams Street, because this was an area where a lot of Jewish immigrants lived at that time, they had a parade. They had what they called a Grand March that was kind of a celebration to open the Adams Street Synagogue, which is still there, which just celebrated 100th anniversary. So when I was asked to write a piece that was in the style of a klezmer piece that was like a Jewish dance piece, I decided, I saw on the website, the Adams Street website, it's really a great website, Adams Street Shul website. They have the whole history of the Jews of this neighborhood. And I read about this parade, and I thought, I'll write a piece for the parade. So that's what I did. I wrote a Grand March for the parade.
How do you make the instruments work well together?
You know, you have to learn something called orchestration. So that is some basic stuff. If you have friends who play instruments, you get them together, and pretty soon you'll discover that you don't really want the trombones playing higher than the flutes, you know, for example. And you probably, you know, don't really want the saxophones to be playing the background music when, you know, the flutes are playing the melody. I mean, you just have to learn stuff about what instrument's louder, what instrument's in this range, what instrument's in that range, and pretty soon you get an idea of how they blend. And you also can look at scores. That's a nice thing to do. So when I'm writing music, if I'm writing an orchestra piece, I'll look at what Mendelssohn did, or I'll look at what Tchaikovsky did. They were pretty smart. Rimsky-Korsakov, he was really good. Ravel, whoa, you know. So, I mean, some composers were better than others at this. So, you know, you can study that. And it's a good thing to study if you're writing music, because otherwise people look at you like you're crazy.
Dr. Netsky, what other composers inspire you?
You know, all kinds of composers inspire me. Composers of all kinds of music inspire me. I love, for example, I mentioned tango music because I listen to a lot of Astor Piazzolla. He was a wonderful composer. I love a jazz composer named Randy Weston because he brings in Middle Eastern sounds and the sounds of African music. I also love Elvis Costello. I also think Pink Floyd's pretty awesome. So there's a lot of music out there that is great to listen to. And it really doesn't have any limits. If you're a musician, you know, these days, you have access to the whole world. And there's a lot of great stuff. I mean, you know, someone will just say, hey, you check out this gypsy band on YouTube, and I'll check them out. It's like the best thing I ever heard. You know, so you never know.
What advice do you have for kids that are interested in composing?
If you're interested in composing, I would say get your friends together and write for them. That's the most important thing. And, you know, for me, I mean, I have to say, see, if I were one of you, I'd be writing for you guys. If I was in high school and there was a band, I'd write for the band. I did that. I mean, I led my high school marching band. And so I took my favorite tunes and I arranged them for the high school marching band. And that's how I actually, you know, started working with bigger ensembles. And, you know, it was tremendous fun to do that. So, you know, if you got 2 friends who play instruments, write a piece for your 2 friends who play instruments. If you got 3 friends who play instruments, put a band together and play for your family and play for your friends. There's nothing stopping you, but except for having ideas. So, you know, I always tell my students at the conservatory, I say there's 4 parts to, you know, being a creative musician. And one of them is just repertoire. You got to know music. You got to know songs. So here's my real advice to you. If you want to become a composer, you got to learn songs. You know, because guess what? You know, if you're trying to compose and you don't know any music, you're not going to be able to compose. I remember that for myself. I want to be a composer, and I want to get better as a composer. I went and took out a lot of books on composing. And the books just talked about pieces that already been written that I never heard of. So how is that going to help me? And finally, I realized you just had to learn the music. You had to learn the music you love. If you learn music you love, you'll be able to write pieces that are like the music you love. Then there's your technique, which could be your technique as a composer, technique as a player. Then there's just your life experience. You know, she's going to write different music than him because they've been through different things, you know, probably, unless they're brother and sister. I have no idea. But I don't think so. And then there's your creativity, and that's the whole question. If you're not someone who's creative, then maybe you don't feel like writing music. And that's OK, too. Not everyone has to. But if you feel like doing it, it's very rewarding, and it's very stifling if you don't. You just have to write it.